The world is preoccupied with the wrong conflict. While public attention is directed towards import duties, currency shifts, and stock market instability, a more insidious and critical struggle has intensified behind the scenes. This is not a war waged with projectiles or naval fleets, but rather with administrative approvals, manufacturing limits, and trade authorizations. It is the contest for silver. For many years, the Western world has operated under a mistaken assumption. We perceived the global marketplace as a retail establishment, believing that possession of dollars granted us the ability to acquire any desired commodity. We were convinced that if a company like Samsung required silver for its innovative battery designs, or if Tesla needed it for its solar roofing technology, a simple credit card transaction would suffice to deliver the material. That era has definitively concluded. We are presently observing the emergence of resource nationalism. This term, though sophisticated, signifies a straightforward and harsh reality. Nations possessing essential resources are now preventing those in need from accessing them. China has just signaled a development that will reshape the geopolitical landscape of the 21st century. Emerging reports and policy adjustments indicate that Beijing is preparing to reclassify silver, not as a precious metal, but as a strategically vital mineral. This designation bestows upon the state the legal authority to impose export restrictions, manage domestic stockpiles, and give precedence to national industries over international purchases. The question arises, why now, and why specifically silver? The answer lies in technological advancements. As we explored in our detailed analysis of new battery technologies, silver's role extends far beyond its traditional use as currency. It is an indispensable component of the burgeoning green economy. The construction of solid-state batteries is impossible without it. The fabrication of advanced TOPCon solar panels necessitates its inclusion. Similarly, the assembly of 5G communication chips requires its presence. China is acutely aware of this. The nation holds a dominant position in the manufacturing of all three of these technological sectors. They are responsible for the production of 80% of the world's solar panels and 70% of the world's batteries. They understand that any depletion of their silver reserves would jeopardize their global leadership. Consequently, they are taking the most logical course of action. They are closing their export gates. If one views this as mere conjecture, a glance at historical precedents offers a different perspective. In 2010, China curtailed its exports of rare earth elements to Japan in response to a maritime dispute. This action resulted in a 2,000% surge in prices. More recently, in 2023, they imposed restrictions on the export of gallium and germanium to the West, causing immediate disruption to the semiconductor supply chain. Now, the focus has shifted to silver. In this extensive multi-part examination, we will meticulously reveal the mechanisms of this emerging resource conflict. We will investigate the critical bottleneck in refining capabilities that grants China leverage over the global market, irrespective of their direct mining output. We will elaborate on how Mexico and Peru are likely to follow suit, thereby establishing a silver-producing cartel that can hold the West in a precarious position. Furthermore, we will elucidate the implications of these developments for individual silver holders. In a world where nations are consolidating their metal reserves, those who possess physical silver in their own secure storage become significant strategic assets. The era of readily available commodity markets is over. The embargo has commenced. This is the unfolding narrative of the silver lockdown. To comprehend our current trajectory, it is imperative to acknowledge the overconfidence that led us here. For 40 years, the Western financial system has treated raw materials as mere inputs, cheap, plentiful, and often overlooked. Financial institutions in London and New York gravitated towards trading financial instruments like derivatives, stocks, bonds, and futures. They viewed tangible commodities, copper, oil, silver as less sophisticated, lower-margin ventures suitable for outsourcing to developing economies. This is precisely what transpired. We ceased operations at our smelting facilities in the United States. We enacted regulations that effectively eliminated our mining industries in Europe. The less desirable aspects of refining and processing were delegated to China. We rationalized this by asserting that we were advancing our economy towards service-based and technology-driven sectors, believing ourselves to be particularly astute. China accepted the arrangement. They bore the environmental burdens and the low labor costs. Crucially, however, they also gained control. While we were developing applications, they were constructing smelters. While we were engaged in speculative trading of paper silver on commodity exchanges, they were amassing physical silver through the Shanghai Gold Exchange. As we liquidated our strategic reserves to balance national budgets, they were acquiring mining operations across Africa and South America. The net has now been cast. The Western nations have belatedly recognized that a digital economy cannot be sustained without tangible physical elements. An artificial intelligence revolution is impossible without a reliable electricity supply, and electricity generation is dependent on conductive materials like copper and silver. The global transition to green energy fundamentally represents a shift from an economy reliant on fuel to one dependent on minerals. However, these essential minerals are concentrated in the East, as is the processing capacity. China currently refines approximately 40 to 50% of the world's copper, lithium, and cobalt. Their dominance in the silver processing chain is equally tightening. Even when silver is extracted in Mexico, a significant portion of the raw concentrate is transported across the Pacific for smelting in China. This grants Beijing ultimate control. If they choose to halt the export of refined silver bullion, the volume of ore extracted in Mexico becomes irrelevant. Without the smelting infrastructure in Mexico to transform that ore into 99.9 fine silver bars, the supply chain is effectively severed. The West possesses virtually no surplus smelting capacity. Establishing a new smelter is a process that demands 5 years and billions of dollars. We have willingly placed ourselves in a vulnerable position, and that vulnerability is now being exploited. Let us examine the established pattern. This is not a hypothetical scenario. It is a repetition of events that occurred just 2 years ago with gallium and germanium. While these are relatively obscure metals, they are indispensable for advanced semiconductors, radar systems, and military optics. For an extended period, the United States military depended on a steady, inexpensive supply from China. Subsequently, the US imposed restrictions on China's access to cutting-edge AI chips. China's response was not a military action or financial sanctions. Instead, they simply announced that exporters of gallium and germanium would require special authorization to ship these metals internationally. Overnight, exports plummeted to zero, and prices in the West doubled. The Pentagon found itself in a state of disarray, and defense contractors experienced panic as they realized the absence of domestic sources. This was a clear warning signal. China demonstrated its ability to disrupt the Western defense industry at will. Now, let us apply this same logic to silver. Silver's importance far surpasses that of gallium. Gallium is utilized in specialized chips, whereas silver is integral to virtually every sector. It is present in every electrical switch, every solar panel, every automobile, every missile, and every medical facility. Should China impose restrictions on silver exports, the impact would extend beyond the military to encompass the entire economy. It would impede the progress of green energy initiatives, cripple the electric vehicle industry, and render the production of smartphones, such as the iPhone, unfeasible. This represents the ultimate form of leverage. Unlike gallium, where China is the primary producer, the silver market is considerably more intricate. While China does produce silver, its domestic consumption significantly exceeds its production, making it a net importer. Therefore, the question arises, how can they restrict exports if they are themselves an importer? This is the ingenious aspect of their strategy. They absorb the global supply. They procure the concentrate from Peru and Mexico, refine it, and then retain it within their own borders. Their action is not an import ban, but rather a prohibition on re-exportation. This transforms the international flow of silver into a system from which there is no return. The metal enters, but it does not depart. It travels from the mines of the Americas to the factories of Asia and remains there. The vaults in London are depleted. The reserves in commodity exchanges are drained. The West is left with financial contracts, while the East holds the physical inventory. The timing of China's actions is pertinent, and the answer lies in the sun. China commands over 80% of the global solar panel manufacturing supply chain, overseeing the production of polysilicon, wafers, cells, and modules. They are, in essence, the Saudi Arabia of solar energy. However, solar panels have substantial material requirements. As previously discussed, the transition to TOPCon technology has increased the silver content required per panel. The Chinese solar industry alone consumes hundreds of millions of ounces of silver annually. If the global silver price were to escalate to $100 or $200 per ounce due to scarcity, Chinese manufacturers would face significant challenges. Their profit margins would be severely impacted, and they might lose market share if forced to raise prices. However, by restricting silver exports, China creates a bifurcated pricing structure. Within China, silver would remain accessible to its manufacturers at a predictable cost. Internationally, silver would become exceedingly scarce. This grants Chinese solar companies a substantial competitive advantage, as they can secure the necessary material. Western competitors such as First Solar in the United States or Mirba in Europe would be unable to do so. China is effectively subsidizing its own industry by withholding essential raw materials from its rivals. This is a classic mercantilist strategy, mirroring the historical practices of the British Empire with wool and cotton, and the United States with oil in the 1940s. The principle is to secure the resource to safeguard the industry. This rationale lends significant credibility to the rumors of an export ban, as it aligns perfectly with China's industrial objectives. They are not interested in selling silver bars to investors in New York. Rather, they aim to sell finished solar panels to governments in Europe. The primary value addition resides in the technology, not merely the metal itself. However, to effectively market their technology, they must control the supply of the underlying material. We must abandon the notion of a singular global price for silver. For a century, it has been assumed that an ounce of silver in Shanghai carries the same value as an ounce in London. While arbitrage mechanisms historically maintained price parity, export restrictions fundamentally disrupt this. If the physical movement of metal out of China is prohibited, the price in London could theoretically soar to $100 while remaining at $80 in Shanghai. The markets become decoupled. This creates extreme volatility and considerable risk for participants in paper-silver markets. If one holds a short position on a commodity exchange and the exchange is unable to obtain physical metal because China has ceased shipments, arbitrage becomes an impossible solution. The ability to acquire inexpensive metal in Asia for delivery in New York is eliminated. Participants are trapped in a localized market squeeze. We are currently observing indications of this phenomenon. Premiums on silver in Shanghai have consistently exceeded those in New York for several months, signifying a westward flow of metal that remains in the east. The concept of a free market inherently implies the unimpeded movement of goods. When this movement is obstructed, the market ceases to be free and devolves into a series of isolated enclaves. Within the Western enclave, resources are becoming depleted. We have divested our strategic reserves and allowed our inventories to dwindle. Now, as the barriers rise, we are confronting the reality that we are positioned disadvantageously within this blockade. In military strategy, a choke point is a narrow, strategic passage that facilitates transit to or through another region. Consider the Strait of Hormuz for oil, or the Suez Canal for maritime traffic. Control over such a choke point grants dominion over the flow of resources. It is not necessary to own the oil fields. One simply needs to command the narrow waterway. In the context of the silver conflict, the choke point is not a geographic feature, but rather the smelting facility. A fundamental error is commonly made by investors. They examine maps of global silver production, noting the abundance of resources in countries like Mexico, Peru, and Chile, and conclude that the Americas, with whom the West maintains friendly relations, ensure security. This is a dangerous misconception. While the raw ore originates in the Americas, ore is not equivalent to refined metal. When a mine in Mexico extracts rock, it does not yield the polished 1,000-ounce bars ready for commodity exchanges. Instead, it produces concentrated, dense, hazardous gray powder, containing approximately 10 to 20% silver, mixed with lead, zinc, arsenic, and sulfur. To transform this toxic powder into 99.9 fine silver, a smelter is required. And who, over the past 2 decades, has invested in developing the world's most extensive, efficient, and environmentally impactful smelting infrastructure? China. The narrative of the West's loss of control over silver processing is intricately linked to environmental regulations and a focus on short-term capitalist gains. Smelting is an inherently problematic industrial process. It demands substantial energy inputs and generates significant emissions, including sulfur dioxide and heavy metal waste. It is an unsightly industry. During the 1990s and 2000s, the United States and Europe opted to phase out this sector. Environmental Protection Agency regulations became more stringent, and energy costs escalated. Consequently, one by one, the major Western smelters ceased operations. The Asarco smelter in El Paso is gone. The Trail smelter in Canada, while one of the few remaining, lacks the capacity to handle global demand. Meanwhile, China adopted a different approach, declaring, "We will accept it." Anas. They established vast industrial zones dedicated to metallurgy, subsidized energy costs, and largely disregarded the associated pollution. Furthermore, they offered premiums for concentrate purchased from global miners. This led to a fundamental shift in the supply chain. A miner in Mexico extracts silver ore. However, instead of refining it domestically or in Texas, the concentrate is loaded onto bulk cargo vessels. These ships then traverse the Pacific Ocean to ports in Shandong or Henan provinces. Chinese smelters process the material, extracting valuable components such as lead, zinc, gold, and silver. Herein lies the critical factor. Possession is 9/10 of the law. Once this concentrate arrives in China, the silver it contains falls under Chinese jurisdiction and enters the Chinese economic system. If the Chinese Communist Party determines that strategic metals are prohibited from leaving the country, that silver becomes immobilized. Its origin in Mexico, or its extraction by a Canadian company, becomes immaterial. It is now situated within a Chinese warehouse. The West has effectively relinquished control over its own reserves by outsourcing the crucial processing stages. We provided the raw ore and are now compelled to petition for the repurchase of the refined metal. This dynamic creates what can be termed the toll road trap. China functions as the toll gate for the global metals market. Even if they do not consume the silver directly, they process it. Typically, they re-export a considerable portion, selling the refined bars back to markets in London or New York. However, in a scenario of scarcity, this toll booth can be closed. China has already demonstrated this capability with respect to copper and rare earth elements. They have developed such extensive processing capacity that they can handle more material than the world produces. This bestows upon them monopsony power, making them the largest purchaser of raw concentrate. Consequently, they can dictate terms to the mining companies. They may agree to purchase concentrate only under the condition of long-term contracts or invest in mines with the stipulation of securing offtake rights. This explains the presence of Chinese state-owned enterprises, acquiring stakes in junior mining operations across South America and Africa. They are securing the feedstock for their smelters and locking up supply at its source. The logical question arises, why do we not simply construct new smelters in America? If we are vulnerable, corrective action should be taken. However, this is not feasible, or at least not at a sufficient pace. Establishing a new polymetallic smelter in the United States today presents a formidable bureaucratic challenge. Initially, obtaining the necessary permits for air quality, water usage, and land development can consume 5 to 7 years. This is invariably followed by legal challenges from environmental advocacy groups concerned about toxic pollution. Subsequently, securing the requisite capital is a major hurdle, as smelters represent multi-billion-dollar investments. Finally, a reliable and affordable energy supply is paramount. Smelters require consistent baseload power. With the United States grid increasingly transitioning to intermittent sources like wind and solar, industrial electricity rates are escalating dramatically. Rebuilding domestic smelting capacity to rival China's would require a decade. We do not possess such a time frame. Samsung's battery technology is already here. The demand for solar energy is present now. The critical shortage is anticipated in 2025, not 2035. This represents the green wall. Ironically, the very environmental regulations that mandate the construction of solar panels and electric vehicles are the same ones that hinder our ability to process the silver required for their production. We have, through our regulatory framework, inadvertently created a significant impediment. This dominance in refining explains the mystery behind the dwindling stockpiles. Over the past 3 years, we have witnessed a substantial decline in silver inventories held by the London Bullion Market Association, LBMA, and COMEX. Where has this silver gone? It has flowed eastward. However, this is not solely attributable to individual investors purchasing coins. Rather, it reflects the structural reallocation of the supply chain towards regions with smelting capabilities. As Western smelters have ceased operations or reduced their output, the physical center of gravity for silver processing has shifted. The London spot price is determined by the availability of bars in London. However, if new bars are being produced in Henan, China, and are not being transported to London, the London vaults will deplete, and once they are empty, the established pricing mechanism will falter. We are now experiencing the repercussions of 30 years of industrial neglect. A financialized precious metals market cannot function without the physical commodity, and the physical commodity cannot be procured without the factories capable of purifying it. This situation jeopardizes the narrative of reliable, friendly suppliers. The United States government promotes friend-shoring, advocating for sourcing materials exclusively from allied nations like Mexico or Canada. However, if silver from Mexico must be sent to China for refining, it ceases to be a friendly supply. It becomes captured supply. Unless the United States can persuade Mexico to cease exporting, concentrate to China, or can subsidize the construction of extensive new refineries in North America, a process that is far too protracted, the bottleneck will persist. China holds a critical leverage point over the silver market. They do not need to apply excessive pressure. A minor delay in export licenses or a reduction in quotas is sufficient to cause significant distress in the West. If the smelter represents the choke point, then the solar panel is the primary motivation. To understand why China is contemplating restricting silver exports, one must examine its national strategic objectives. China's ambition is not to be the world's primary source of raw materials, nor is it to remain solely a refiner. Their objective is to become the world's preeminent manufacturer. Specifically, they aim to control the global energy infrastructure of the 21st century. In the 20th century, control over oil translated to global dominance. In the 21st century, dominance is achieved by controlling the manufacturing of green energy technologies. China has attained a level of control within the solar industry that is deeply concerning to Western strategic planners. They command approximately 80% of the global manufacturing capacity across all stages of the solar supply chain, encompassing polysilicon, wafers, cells, and modules. They are, in effect, the dominant force in solar energy production. However, this dominance is contingent on access to essential materials. Solar panels are not composed of theoretical elements, they are constructed from tangible resources. The single most costly and indispensable material in a solar cell is silver. Imagine the perspective of a central planner in Beijing. You possess a stockpile of refined silver within your national reserves. Option A involves exporting that silver bar to London for $60 an ounce, generating immediate cash revenue. Option B entails retaining that silver bar within China, transforming it into silver paste, applying it to a solar cell, assembling a panel, and then selling that panel to a market such as Germany or the United States. Option A generates minimal employment and limited profit. Option B, conversely, employs millions of Chinese workers, solidifies a dominant position in a strategic industry, and yields substantial export revenues. The economic calculation is straightforward. Exporting raw commodities is the domain of colonial economies. Exporting high-technology manufactured goods is the hallmark of a superpower. Therefore, as the global supply of silver becomes increasingly constrained, why would China permit even a single ounce of raw silver to depart its borders? Every ounce exported represents an ounce that cannot be utilized to produce a solar panel. Every ounce that leaves China contributes to the success of a competitor. This is the fundamental logic behind the potential export ban, driven by a desire to maximize the economic value derived from every gram of silver. By retaining silver within China, they artificially reduce the domestic price for their manufacturers while simultaneously driving up the global price for all other consumers. The timing of this potential action is critically important, particularly in light of the technological advancements previously discussed. The implementation of TOPCon, tunnel oxide passivated contact, technology represents a significant shift, and the Chinese solar industry has aggressively adopted this new standard. TOPCon panels are more efficient but require 20 to 50% more silver than older PERSH, passivated emitter and rear cell panels. This technological pivot has created a substantial internal demand for silver within China. In 2023 alone, the Chinese solar sector consumed nearly 200 million ounces of silver, accounting for approximately 25% of the entire global mine supply, solely utilized by one industry within a single country. Furthermore, their expansion plans are extensive. China's solar installation targets for 2025 and 2030 are staggeringly ambitious, with projected installations in a single year exceeding the total cumulative installations of the United States throughout its history. To achieve these targets, a substantial silver supply is indispensable. If they were forced to compete with companies like Samsung, the US Mint, and Indian manufacturers in the open market, the price of silver would inevitably skyrocket. However, by closing their borders and declaring that China's silver will remain within China, they secure their necessary supply. This brings us to the aspect of weaponization. The United States and European nations are intensely focused on revitalizing their domestic solar panel manufacturing capabilities. In the US, the Inflation Reduction Act is injecting substantial financial resources, amounting to billions of dollars, to subsidize the establishment of factories producing solar panels within America. Prominent companies, such as First Solar and Hanwha Q Cells, are actively constructing extensive manufacturing facilities in states including Ohio, Georgia, and Arizona. However, a manufacturing plant is rendered ineffectual without its essential raw components. These American facilities require a specific material, silver paste. The origin of this silver paste is primarily China. Even if efforts are made to procure it from alternative sources, the global valuation of this metal is dictated by its overall availability. Should China impose restrictions on silver exports, the cost for American manufacturers would escalate dramatically. This scenario would render American-made solar panels prohibitively expensive, unable to compete. Consequently, Western nations would be compelled to continue purchasing finished solar panels from China, as they would remain the more economical option. This represents a calculated and aggressive tactic: control the foundational resources, stifle competing industries, and thus preserve a monopolistic hold on the final product. China appears willing to forgo immediate financial gains from selling silver to secure long-term dominance in the energy sector. Their approach is akin to a strategic chess game, while the West is playing a simpler game of checkers. This strategy aligns perfectly with President Xi Jinping's blueprint for dual circulation. The objective is to foster internal self-sufficiency within China, while simultaneously cultivating global dependence on China's external economic activity. Silver is an ideal element for this strategy. By retaining silver domestically, China bolsters its internal economic cycle. By exporting solar panels, it strengthens its influence over the global market. This places Western investors in a precarious predicament. The silver available on commodity markets represents the surplus, the silver that China has not yet acquired, the silver not yet absorbed by the voracious demand of the solar industry. Yet this industrial demand is ever growing. With the recent news of Samsung's advancements in battery technology creating an additional surge in demand, China is acutely aware that the window for securing this vital metal at favorable prices is narrowing. Export limitations serve as a decisive barrier, signaling an impending era of resource scarcity. China possesses the manufacturing infrastructure and the refining capacity. They intend to retain the raw material. Consider the situation of a procurement manager for a solar company in Germany at this moment. They are confronted with headlines detailing China's review of strategic mineral exports and Samsung's announcement of a silver-intensive battery technology, alongside reports of refinery disruptions. Examining their inventory, they discover they have only 3 weeks' supply of silver paste remaining. Their immediate reaction would be one of alarm. They would contact their supplier, urgently requesting a doubled order. The supplier, however, would be unable to fulfill this request, citing increased prices and limited availability. The manager would then express a lack of concern for the cost, prioritizing only the acquisition of the material. This is the genesis of the commercial squeeze. It is not driven by amateur investors speculating on trading platforms, but by major industrial entities vying for survival. Meanwhile, China observes this scramble with detached confidence, their warehouses replete with the essential metal. The ramifications of this situation extend far beyond the price of silver itself. A dramatic increase in silver's value would inevitably lead to more expensive solar energy. The inherently deflationary characteristic of green technologies would be reversed, transforming the transition to net zero emissions into an inflationary endeavor. This makes silver the critical vulnerability of the green energy agenda. Policymakers operated under the flawed assumption that solar energy costs would continuously decline, and that raw material supplies were effectively limitless. Their assumptions were incorrect. As China consolidates a solar monopoly, fortified by its substantial silver reserves, the cost of energy for Western nations will rise, and wealth will increasingly transfer from West to East, from those who issue paper currency to those who control tangible assets. We have examined consumer behavior and analyzed the strategies of China and the United States, observing how their pursuit of technological supremacy drives them to stockpile metals. However, a third significant participant has emerged in this contest: the producers, who have remained relatively quiet but are now asserting themselves. A survey of global silver production reveals a pronounced concentration in Latin America, with Mexico leading, followed by Peru, Chile, and Bolivia as major contributors. Collectively, this region holds considerable influence over the supply. For approximately 100 years, the relationship has been characterized by a colonial dynamic. Foreign corporations extract silver from Mexico, paying nominal royalties to the government, repatriating profits to financial centers like Toronto or New York, and then exporting the refined metal to China for further processing. Mexico is left with depleted natural resources and low-wage employment, while the West accrues wealth and the East accumulates industrial might. This established arrangement is now obsolete. As silver prices surge, fueled by demand from companies like Samsung and China's export policies, Latin American governments are observing the situation. Witnessing silver trading at prices of $60, $70, or $80 per ounce, they are posing a crucial and potentially destabilizing question. Why should they permit foreign entities to exploit their national wealth at such low valuations? We are witnessing a powerful resurgence of resource nationalism across the global south, a movement that initially focused on lithium, with Chile nationalizing its industry and Mexico establishing a state-owned lithium company. This trend is now extending to copper and silver. The underlying logic is straightforward. If silver is deemed a critical metal for energy production and a linchpin of the green energy transition, then its control becomes a matter of national security. It is improbable that Mexico would permit a Canadian company to export a strategic asset to China when Mexico itself could manage its distribution. Early indicators point towards the formation of a silver OPEC. In the 1970s, a consortium of oil-producing nations collectively restricted supply, thereby commanding higher prices and significantly impacting Western economies. Silver is poised for a similar trajectory. The concentration of silver production is actually more pronounced than that of oil, with a small number of nations controlling the primary supply. Should Mexico, Peru, and Bolivia coordinate their efforts, perhaps by implementing a unified export tax on silver or mandating domestic refining before export, the global supply chain would face severe disruption. Even without complete nationalization, substantial market upheaval can be achieved through taxation. Governments often advocate for windfall profit taxes, perceiving record profits generated by mining companies during price spikes as national assets. Consider this scenario. Silver reaches $80 per ounce. A mine in Mexico, with a production cost of $20 per ounce, realizes a profit of $60 per ounce. The Mexican government then imposes a 75% tax on any price exceeding $30. In this situation, the mining company retains virtually none of the additional profit. It is all captured by the government. This fundamentally alters the economic considerations previously discussed regarding mining investments. Consequently, jurisdiction emerges as a paramount factor. A mine in Mexico might yield substantial silver, but if the government appropriates 90% of the revenue, the stock's value becomes negligible. Conversely, a mine in Nevada, while producing less silver, might benefit from U.S. government incentives like tax breaks aimed at promoting domestic supply, rather than facing punitive taxation. This divergence creates a significant disparity, leading to an amplified political risk discount for Latin American mining companies and a soaring safe haven premium for their North American counterparts. The motivation behind such actions from Mexico could be retaliatory. If China restricts exports of refined silver and the U.S. imposes sanctions on high-tech components, Mexico might perceive itself as being caught between two superpowers. Its primary leverage lies in its natural resources. Recognizing the significant reliance of the U.S. automotive industry on Mexican silver, Mexico could leverage its control over this supply to gain concessions in trade negotiations, effectively turning silver into a bargaining chip. Signs of this friction are already apparent. Foreign mining firms are encountering delays in obtaining permits and are facing new environmental regulations that appear to be a subtle form of expropriation. The implicit message is clear. Any entity seeking access to Mexico's silver must adhere to its terms. The consequence for silver prices is an elevated floor. In a free market, this floor is determined by production costs. If mining an ounce of silver costs $20, the price is unlikely to remain below this level for an extended period. However, if the government imposes a $30 tax, the new effective cost of production rises to $50. The price would then be unlikely to fall below this new threshold, lest mines cease operations. Resource nationalism inherently leads to inflation by artificially increasing the cost of goods to capture greater value for the state. This implies that even if demand were to decrease, which is improbable, silver prices would be supported by an artificial price floor. The era of $20 silver is definitively over, not solely due to geological constraints, but also due to fiscal policy. This creates a hostage situation for industrial consumers. Samsung requires silver, China is hoarding refined bars, and Mexico is taxing the raw ore. The supply chain is being squeezed from both ends, with both refiners and miners demanding higher compensation. Ultimately, the consumers and investors who failed to acquire silver earlier will bear the cost. This dynamic undermines the efficiency of the global market, introducing friction that translates into higher prices. It will also lead to price variations across different regions. Mexican silver might carry a different export tariff than Peruvian silver, and Chinese silver could become entirely inaccessible, regardless of price. We are witnessing the decline of globalism within the metals market. For the past 4 decades, the principles of just-in-time delivery and global sourcing have prevailed. Now we are transitioning towards a paradigm of just-in-case stockpiling and regional trade blocks. The Americas possess the raw materials, while Asia commands processing and manufacturing capabilities. These two spheres are diverging. For investors, understanding the geographical location of their silver holdings is crucial. If one owns mining stock, the critical question is the location of the mine. Is it in a geopolitically stable region, or one likely to join a silver OPEC? This underscores the importance of jurisdictional risk. When prices approach $100 per ounce, greed will supersede caution. Governments, like hedge funds, are susceptible to avarice and may revise mining regulations, abrogate contracts, and implement any measures necessary to retain national wealth domestically. Consequently, we are observing the confluence of 3 powerful forces: explosive technological demand, critical refining bottlenecks, and assertive resource nationalism. These forces are converging on a pricing mechanism that is fundamentally flawed: the London Fix and COMEX futures. These systems were designed for an environment of abundant supply and free trade, not for a resource-driven conflict. We have reached the concluding phase of this examination. We have traced the Silver War from Samsung's laboratories, through China's refineries, to the solar manufacturing plants of Asia, and finally to the mines of Latin America. All these factors, technological innovation, dominance in refining, and resource nationalism, are converging on the single determinant of silver's value. And that determinant is on the verge of collapse. For over a century, the price of silver has been established in 2 primary locations: London and New York. The London Bullion Market Association dictates the daily fix, while the COMEX in New York trades futures contracts that establish the spot price. These systems are predicated on a single fundamental assumption: trust. Trust in the existence of the metal, trust in its deliverability, and trust that monetary value can be exchanged for physical commodity. However, in a resource conflict, trust erodes. When China restricts exports, when Mexico imposes production taxes, and when companies like Samsung bypass open markets to secure direct supply, the flow of metal to London and New York ceases. We are witnessing the demise of Western pricing mechanisms, with the scepter of power transitioning from the paper markets of the West to the physical markets of the East. The outcome will be a price dislocation so severe that it will dwarf the events of 1980. Imagine a thermometer in your home indicating 70 degrees Fahrenheit, while the house itself is engulfed in flames, its walls melting. The thermometer's reading remains 70 because it is malfunctioning, stuck at that point. The spot price of silver is akin to this broken thermometer. It reflects the sentiment of paper traders in New York, who leverage 20-to-1 margins to speculate on price movements. It does not reflect the tangible reality faced by a solar panel manufacturer in Shanghai, who cannot obtain silver paste. As physical supply becomes ensnared by export restrictions and taxes, the COMEX becomes irrelevant. If you hold a COMEX contract and request delivery, and the exchange states, "We regret we have no metal as China is not selling and Mexico is hoarding," what is that contract worth? Its value will be its cash equivalent, but cash is not silver. This represents the force majeure scenario we have previously warned about. The paper market may continue to function, possibly even at a depressed price, but its connection to physical reality will be severed. You may observe a spot price of $50, while the actual market price is $100. The paper market will become a phantom, seemingly operational but devoid of substance. So, where will the true price be determined? Look eastward, to the Shanghai Gold Exchange. Unlike Western markets, which trade in promises, the SGE is fundamentally based on physical delivery, a cash-for-metal marketplace. Because China is the ultimate consumer, metal flows there, and consequently, the truth resides there. For months, we have observed a premium in Shanghai, where silver trades at significantly higher prices than in London. Western analysts dismiss this as an arbitrage anomaly, anticipating its resolution. They are mistaken. This is not an anomaly. It is the authentic price. The lower price in the West is the anomaly, a paper discount stemming from depleted vaults and excessive leverage. As the resource conflict intensifies, the Shanghai price will become the global benchmark. Miners in Peru will no longer focus on the COMEX closing price. They will look to Shanghai. They will question why they should sell to New York at price X when Shanghai offers X plus $5. This gravitational pull is inescapable. Pricing power will shift to the buyer with the greatest financial capacity and the most urgent need. That buyer is China. However, another dimension to this conflict exists, a monetary aspect. A discussion of silver is incomplete without addressing the decline of the dollar standard. The BRICS nations are actively pursuing de-dollarization, establishing trade networks that settle in local currencies or commodities. China and Russia are exchanging oil for gold, while India is purchasing oil with rupees. Silver's role in this evolving landscape is as the people's money. While central banks hoard gold, the populations of India and China hold silver. In an era where fiat currencies are increasingly weaponized, physical metal represents the sole neutral asset. China understands that by stockpiling silver, it is not merely securing a component for battery technology, but also fortifying its reserve of tangible assets. Should the dollar collapse or the US impose sanctions, a warehouse filled with silver offers greater security than one filled with treasury bonds. This adds a monetary premium to the existing industrial demand premium. Silver is experiencing a double squeeze, driven by industrial needs and monetary apprehension. It is the only asset situated at the nexus of two dominant contemporary trends, the green energy transition and the erosion of fiat currencies. What does the future portend? We are heading towards a bifurcated market. Market A, the official market, will feature a government-controlled price, potentially suppressed or heavily taxed. The price disseminated on mainstream financial news channels, and the price the government might pay to acquire metal for national defense. Market B, the shadow market, will represent the free market, exemplified by prices in Shanghai or at local coin dealers. This market will reflect true economic realities and will likely be substantially higher than Market A. We have observed similar phenomena in the Soviet Union and are currently witnessing it in Argentina, with distinct official and blue exchange rates. Savvy investors will operate within the shadow market, holding physical assets. Those who remain in the official market, holding ETFs or unallocated accounts, will be at a disadvantage. When the divergence occurs, when export bans effectively seal off supply, holding assets traded in Market B will be paramount, as Market A will function as a trap. We have covered extensive ground in this analysis. Let us summarize the investment rationale for the battery war. Firstly, the technology is genuine. The silver-carbon anode is not mere speculation, but a scientifically validated advancement, ensuring inelastic and exponential demand. Secondly, the supply chain is compromised. China's refining bottleneck and the geological limitations in mining prevent supply from adequately responding to price increases. Thirdly, the political landscape is adversarial. Resource nationalism in countries like Mexico and Peru signifies government intervention to secure a larger share of profits, thereby raising the effective price floor. Fourthly, the current pricing is inaccurate. The Western paper market is dysfunctional and is being supplanted by Eastern physical market pricing. What actions should be taken? Step 1. Acquire physical silver. Ownership is contingent upon possession. In a trade war scenario, counterparty risk is a critical determinant. An ETF domiciled in London might invoke force majeure in the event of Chinese export restrictions, whereas a silver bar stored in your personal safe will not. Step 2. Scrutinize your mining investments. Review your portfolio and divest from miners located in high-risk jurisdictions. Consider relocating investments to North America or Australia. Seek out unhedged producers, aiming for exposure to market dynamics rather than fixed prices. Step 3. Disregard market noise. Financial institutions may attempt to suppress paper prices, perhaps by increasing margin requirements. The media might downplay shortages. Resist attempts to be forced out of your position. Focus on tangible indicators such as Samsung's factory expansion, Chinese export data, and Mexican tax legislation. These are the true signals. The price ticker is merely incidental noise. The battery war has commenced, with export reviews and refining quotas serving as the initial hostilities. The majority of the public will only realize the conflict has begun when shelves are empty. We are entering a historical period where access to resources will be prioritized over their cost. It will be inconsequential whether one can afford silver at $100 per ounce if it is unavailable for purchase. The window for acquiring this strategic asset is rapidly closing. The gates are beginning to shut. You now possess the information and understand the strategic landscape. The next move is yours.